What is going on, everybody? My name is Eric, and you are listening to another exciting episode of the Unlockables podcast, the story of video games, the people who played them, and the memories made along the way. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If it's your first week, if you tune in every week, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys taking some busy time out of your schedules to take a listen to the show. Wherever, whenever in time and space you might be located, it means a lot to me that you're willing to tune in, listen to the show, give me a listen, and provide feedback. It keeps me going. It keeps me doing the things that I love to do, which is talking about video games on the internet for a small subset of people. But I digress, guys. I am running solo again this week because work has been hectic, life has been hectic. I haven't had a chance to line up guests for the show, but I have some exciting topics in the wings that I have wanted to talk about. After all, this is the Unlockables podcast. It is the story of video games, the people who played them, and the memories made along the way. And there are stories to tell with or without guests, and we are going to be doing that today. First, I would just like to give a little bit of obligatory shout out to the good people over at Hyper Potions, the great dynamic duo who make music, all kinds of video game inspired glitch bass future music, I believe is the genre. It is electronic. It's very cool. They allowed me to use the opening song for the podcast, Time Trials Plus, off of Sonic Mania. They are pretty chill about using any of their music in any kind of creative endeavor, as long as you just reach out and attribute them by the song, that sort of thing. Hyper Potions, go check it out. They just released the Collector's Box, which is a giant collection of all their music from the past several years. Great hits. And I think it's definitely worth going to check out. I was jamming it just earlier today while I was driving to work. It's really good stuff. It'll get you a nice upbeat. Make you feel good to get your stuff done throughout the day. So Hyper Potions, go check them out. Song and channel are always linked in the description of the episodes. So make sure you definitely go and give them a listen. Now, guys, exciting. Episode 13. Well, I'm officially calling it episode 13. We've released some other episodes that have kind of filled in stuff here and there. My last episode I released was a Kingdom Hearts primer for the Guiding Keys series that is going to be coming very soon on this channel. It's going to be a complete journey through the story of Kingdom Hearts, and we're going to be doing deep dives into every single game in this series, from development, from concept, from creation, all the way through gameplay and story, with a heavy emphasis on trying to decode the absolutely insane story of Kingdom Hearts that Tetsuya Nomura has been trying to tell us for the better part of 20 years. So it's going to get crazy. It's going to get awesome. You'll see me go full conspiracy theorist madman. Probably post pictures of the office where I record my podcast, and you'll just see newspaper clippings and string and articles printed out. Just stuff completely everywhere. It's going to be absolutely maddening. Very excited to get that underway. I'll probably be running solo with a couple episodes for the next few weeks. I'm making some appearances on podcasts coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Some from some good friends, some people in the community. Be doing those shows, talk about certain games coming up, and very, very excited to do that. So keep your eyes and ears open. It's because of that reason I have to budget my time very efficiently. So on any given week, I can either have a guest on or be on a show. So it's really kind of a toss-up, really. I try to budget my time between my family work and all of those things. So if I'm appearing on a show, or I'm going to be on a show coming up, it's probably more likely that you're only going to be getting a solo episode from me. I have been having people reach out to be on the show. I'm currently in the process of planning out June and July. So if you've reached out to me to be on the show, I don't worry. I am making plans to have everybody on that wants to come on. It's just been very hectic. So I appreciate you understanding. And I hope that you enjoy listening to me rambling solo about crazy stuff, about Keyblades and Kingdom Hearts and all this other stuff. So I really appreciate it. And the words that have been said so far and the excitement around the Kingdom Hearts series specifically is very exciting. I'm not sure how much of it is exciting for actual celebration of the game, or just to see me go absolutely batshit crazy trying to explain everything that's going on. But either way, I think it's going to be a really, really exciting time. Now, let's move on to the main topic of today. And I have to say, I got inspiration for this topic. I was literally sitting at my desk today trying to figure out what am I going to talk about on the show. I had no idea. I didn't really feel like covering any kind of news topics. Everyone had done a pretty good job about covering things of that nature. So I was listening to podcasts at work, which I have been more tending to do, considering I have a workplace that's tolerant of that. And I was listening to the guys over at the Switch It Up podcast. If you haven't listened to the Switch It Up podcast, I would definitely highly recommend it. But they were talking about the Nintendo Wii and which console was more approachable. Is it the Nintendo Wii or is it the Switch? That's a great conversation. I won't spoil that. You should definitely go check out the show and listen to that conversation. But it did get me thinking about the Nintendo Wii specifically, a console that came out in 2006. And I think it's easy to dismiss the Wii as kind of like, a casual gaming thing and not, the Wii was a juggernaut of success when it came out. It really started Nintendo down this path of differentiation and kind of explains everything that they've done up until now. When you look at it through the lens of the Wii, which was the console that came out after the quote unquote failure of the Nintendo GameCube. I don't know if I would classify the GameCube as a failure. It didn't perform to Nintendo's expectations just because they kind of misread the room about what the current environment of video games was at the time. But I think the GameCube was an important lesson, and I think Nintendo really learned from that process of kind of seeing what Sony and Microsoft are doing in that console generation and kind of lagging behind them. So, and again, I understand that Nintendo is recently in the news for some not so flattering things, right? I think that this episode is not about that, and this episode is not trying to excuse what Nintendo has done. I think that the labor things that they're working on are pretty atrocious in their own right. So that's a completely different story. But I wanted to kind of talk about the history of the Wii specifically because as a person like myself who has a business background and specifically a marketing background, the Wii is a interesting shift in philosophy of what Nintendo was trying to do at the time. So we're going to kind of take a look at that through that lens specifically and kind of look at what the Wii did right, what it didn't do right, how it shifted Nintendo's view on the gaming market, and how did it influence Nintendo going forward. So without further ado, I guess we'll call this episode The Legacy of the Nintendo Wii. Now, if you are even loosely connected to the video game industry at all, or even if you aren't, you probably know or have heard about the Nintendo Wii, Nintendo's famous for everybody console that was released back in November 19th, 2006 in North America, December 2nd, 2006 in Japan, December 7th, 2006 for our friends in Australia, and December 8th, 2006 in the European territories now. Pretty widely available in a short range of time for everybody that wanted to get their hands on one. The Wii was officially discontinued in 2013. That was the last time that they stopped making Wiis. And it was just a little bit ago I read, I didn't write down the specific date, but I think that they recently announced not too many years ago, it might have been 1 or 2 years ago, that they are no longer accepting Wiis for repair. Apparently there was a program in place where you could send your Wii off to Nintendo to get repaired. They are no longer doing that because of the scarcity of replacement parts, which tends to happen when you discontinue a product. Unless third market parties step up, replacement parts aren't really being made or manufactured by Nintendo. So once their kind of current stock of parts to replace something run out, that's really kind of it is. It's kind of in the hands of the third party manufacturers and people who do that to kind of keep that thing going. You know, that's really how business works. They're not going to devote resources to making parts for a 16 year old console now. they have shitty Joy-Cons to manufacture. So why fix a console that is beloved by millions of people, when you can just manufacture faulty controllers for 6 years or however long it's been now. But enough about that. As of 2019, there were 101.63 million Wii units sold, according to the last generation here. In that generation, 101.63 million units sold, compared to 84 million for the Xbox 360, compared to 87.4 million for the PlayStation 3. And just to kind of give a modern day comparison, the Switch is currently standing at about 107 million units, give or take some, because, the numbers on the internet are old as soon as they're published. Very successful console, for all things considered. It was Nintendo's most successful console of all time, beating out the NES at about 64 million units, I believe, up until the Switch just passed it earlier this year, announcing they had sold 107 million units. So very, very impressive for Nintendo. I believe it was sitting somewhere around like the fourth best-selling console of all time. I think they just passed the PlayStation 4, or it's around the PlayStation 4. The Switch just passed PlayStation 4, I'm sorry. So, yeah, and obviously would be a tall task to catch the juggernaut that was the PlayStation 2. Best-selling game at launch, of course, Wii Sports, 82.9 million units. This is kind of deceiving, so I kind of split the stats here, right? So Wii Sports officially, quote unquote, sold 82.9 million units, but that was because for the majority of the Wii bundles that you could get, Wii Sports was a pack-in game. So pretty much if you were getting a Wii, you were getting Wii Sports, which the adoption rate for Wii Sports compared to like 82.9 million copies of Wii Sports compared to 101 million copies of the Wii, 80% like adoption rate pretty much is fucking insane. But like I said, it was a pack-in title. So odds are if you were getting a Wii for Christmas or buying one, you were getting Wii Sports. So I decided to find like what the highest selling standalone game was, and I'm pretty sure this will surprise literally nobody. It was Mario Kart Wii, because of course it was. 37.3 million units sold standalone, which is crazy if you think about it. Off the top of my head, I think the Kingdom Hearts series as a whole has sold like 40 million units. So Mario Kart Wii is out here like outselling some games in long running franchises that have multiple games out. And then Mario Kart Wii is just like, yo, it's Mario Kart. What do you expect? So that's just kind of the statistics that Nintendo Wii was released into. Obviously, it was the follow up of the GameCube. And that's really kind of where the story of the Wii begins, is with the Nintendo GameCube. After the release of the GameCube, Nintendo pretty much began conceptualizing design for their next console pretty early on in the life of the GameCube. I mean, you have to be that forward thinking, right? If you're not, I would be willing to bet that all these companies like Microsoft and Sony, when they put out a console, they're already thinking about the next generation, right? You have to be that at least some percentage of your business has to be that forward looking, because if you're in a technology space with how fast technology advances, you have to be thinking about the next more powerful, more modern console, right? The video game industry has, I would say console generations spanned anywhere from like 7 to 10 years at most, right? Then the 360 came out like 06, 07. And pretty much around like 12, 13, we were getting the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. So if you think about console lifespans, hardware development, and I don't claim to be an expert, is probably a pretty lengthy process. So if you say you have, 5 to 7 to 10 years maybe for a current console life cycle, you better get to work on the next iteration of whatever that is right away. And it becomes clear pretty early on, I would say, barring massive turnarounds. Like the PS3 kind of turned it around towards the end of its life cycle. Xbox One, for all that, it pretty much took the Xbox One's entire life cycle to turn that ship around. I don't know if it really ever did. It wasn't until the advent of Game Pass that Microsoft got back a lot of the goodwill of the gaming community. So after the release of the GameCube, Nintendo began conceptualizing the design of their next console. And early on in development, Shigeru Miyamoto, legendary creator of Mario, stated that the company decided not to compete with Sony and Microsoft on power of console, instead focusing on conceptualizing new gameplay mechanics. Miyamoto specifically cited Dance Dance Revolution as an inspiration starting point for new ways to control and new ways to have experiences in video games. So very early on, when it became apparent that Nintendo kind of missed the mark with the GameCube, Miyamoto and newly appointed president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, may he rest in peace, immediately began conceptualizing the next generation of Nintendo as being, they didn't want to be in a computing space, which is kind of where the video game industry has been heading for a long time. They knew they didn't have, not that they didn't have the technology, but if you're going to try and compete with a company like Microsoft in a computer space, not going to go very well, because that's what Microsoft does. Microsoft does computers. I mean, and modern consoles today are becoming closer and closer to computers. Sony's done a pretty good job of it, but Sony's been in the high-end video gaming space for a while now, and Nintendo has always, even from the early days, been viewed as like a toy, right? So they didn't want to compete with Sony and Microsoft for like the more traditional hardcore gaming audience. As the GameCube lagged behind the PS2 and Xbox in sales, former Nintendo president Satoru Iwata recognized Nintendo had been lagging behind its competitors in gaming trends and felt that gaming had become too exclusive. With its next console, Nintendo wanted to widen the demographic. With these concepts in mind, Iwata directed Nintendo veterans Shigeru Miyamoto and Genyo Takeda to spearhead the development. Takeda led hardware development, while Miyamoto focused on creating a revolutionary new controller with motion controls and gyration technology. This is a pretty solid move. If you know anything about Miyamoto and his journey as a game designer, right? His biggest philosophy when creating games is, if the game is fun for him, it's fun for other people. That's literally how he designs. If it's something that he will enjoy doing, he knows that other people will enjoy it too. He kind of designs by his gut instinct there, right? So even though I wouldn't say that Miyamoto's primary background is in hardware, he understands design and he understands the gaming space. I mean, he created Mario, and Mario controls better. I would argue that Super Mario Bros., the original on NES, controls better than 75% of modern games on the market. Like, there are games that came out 20, 25 years after that, Rockstar, that don't control nearly as good as Super Mario Bros. On the NES. The controls are so tight. Oh, God, talk about that for a while. So, makes sense to have two Nintendo titans head up the development of this next generation console, which was codenamed Nintendo Revolution. So there were a lot of things that went into the design of the Wii, right? They immediately decided that they weren't going to compete on hardware. They wanted the controls to be new, revolutionary. Miyamoto wanted to experiment and create new, fun ways of controlling and interacting with games. Henceforth, the Wiimote. That's very clear where that idea came from. And this makes sense too. Like, let me just share a little anecdote about my favorite story about Miyamoto. There's an article, I forget who wrote it, but the team that was making Donkey Kong, I believe it was Tropical Freeze, maybe, one of the more modern 2D Donkey Kong games, and they brought it to Miyamoto to playtest it because obviously, if you're making a new Donkey Kong game, who better to bring it to than the creator of Donkey Kong and a man who just has incredible insights into what makes a game a game. Bring it to Miyamoto, obviously, right? He'll find something about it and send you in the right direction. So they brought it to him, and he played for like an hour, and they noticed that during the hour, he spent pretty much the whole time, like, he was like jumping towards the edge of the screen where he couldn't move anymore, and just seeing how Donkey Kong landed and seeing like how the air puffed out from him and kind of moved stuff. And he just spent like an hour just doing that and looking at it. And he didn't even like play the full level of the game. And after like their hour was up, he just said, he's like, hey, like this wind thing, or like you have where he like lands and stuff, like that's a pretty neat little attention to detail you have right there. You should incorporate that into the game. And I believe they did by including some like blowing wind mechanics and stuff. So his attention to detail is just so far out there that he's going to conceptualize an idea that you probably didn't even think of. And with the advent of like motion controls and stuff, I don't know if I'd call it like in 2006, but obviously Microsoft tried to push something similar, and Sony did too with the Move and the Kinect. So they obviously thought motion controls would be like a big thing, which I guess sort of. I guess they're more prevalent nowadays in like the world of VR. I digress. Like there's still some like motion control things with the Switch, but I digress. One of the other more important things too that they conceptualized during this process was they made sure to do a lot of market research. And one of Iwata's primary things that he tasked Miyamoto with doing, and Takeda, that in the process of creating this console, during the conceptualization stage when they were talking about the market research they had gathered, one of the things that Iwata tasked Miyamoto and Takeda with doing was creating a console that would be appealing to mothers. And that was pretty much the design philosophy that they went forward with. They decided that if they couldn't compete with Microsoft and Sony on traditional hardware sense, if they couldn't compete for the standard demographic of gamers, quote unquote, hardcore gamers, TM, capital G, trademarked, copyrighted, that they would just make a new demographic and try to widen the gaming demographic by as much as they possibly could. And if you've read up about Nintendo on this a little bit, you'll understand that the philosophy that they went with to achieve this has been talked about before. It is the controversial but often lauded Blue Ocean strategy. Now, if you've heard about Blue Ocean strategy before, that's great. It is a business and marketing philosophy used to create new unexplored markets, which are quote unquote called blue oceans, which in turns make competition in the same space irrelevant. This is the process, the thinking. If you can't compete in the current market, which is called the red ocean because there are competitors and competitors draw blood, henceforth red ocean, kind of a weirdly violent metaphor for business, but also kind of strangely accurate for how hyper competitive the gaming industry is. So you would seek out these so-called blue oceans for new opportunities in uncontested spaces and take advantage of those. And if you're starting to think of, hey, this kind of sounds like Nintendo, it's because really this philosophy with the Wii, not so much the Wii U, and with the Switch has kind of guided the company forward over the last, I would say, decade and a half. The Blue Ocean strategy was originally conceptualized in a book by the same name. If you want to look it up, it's actually kind of interesting to me because I'm a business nerd, but it was authored by W. Chan Kim and Renee Mauborgne? Mauborgne? Sounds French, there's a G in there. And the book is divided into 3 parts, which highlight the key tenets of the philosophy, business practice, strategy. It kind of, I don't know exactly which one it is. I guess obviously it would be a business strategy because it worked for Nintendo. And I'll highlight these 3 things briefly so you can kind of see, because this is the most interesting aspect of this story for me, is what business philosophy Nintendo undertook to make the Wii pretty much a resounding success for that console generation. So the first part of Blue Ocean's strategy kind of presents the key concepts of it, right? Including things like value innovation, which is the simultaneous pursuit of differentiation and low cost. Ha. God, if that doesn't describe Nintendo, I don't know what does. Nintendo constantly seeks to differentiate itself from the traditional gaming market, and it really tries to achieve that at low cost. Now, normally those two things wouldn't really go hand in hand. Normally, if you're trying to differentiate yourself, you're putting a lot of money in R&D, you're putting a lot of money in marketing to say, hey, like, our product is different, but still valuable. Normally, you're not able to achieve the kind of low cost gains from production and also have differentiation. But this philosophy makes the argument that you actually can do that, right? It also puts in it talks about like the 4-action framework about how you can eliminate the trade-off between differentiation and low cost within a company. I won't name those, but that's like the first part. And the first idea of the strategy is to achieve both differentiation and low cost. And it kind of goes into how you can eliminate certain parts of your business, how you can boost other parts of your business to work towards that goal, right? It's kind of cut off the fat that you don't need, to that anything that's not really serving that purpose to achieve a differentiation / low cost strategy isn't really needed anymore. So you kind of just cut it off and it goes to the wayside. And that when it also argues that when you have this constraint upon your business that you want to achieve low cost and differentiation, that will breed innovation, right? It'll force people to be creative to achieve the most efficient, low-cost solution possible while still being a quality product when going to the market, except with the Joy-Cons, because the Joy-Cons suck. I will never end my crusade against the Joy-Cons, Nintendo. If you ever hear this, know that I will never forget. Even if I have a podcast in 50 years as an old man, I will not forget the Joy-Cons. So that's really kind of the first part of that strategy, right? And then the second part describes how to formulate around that strategy. And it's really talks about, as an organization, creating these blue oceans, creating these new markets. And that's what Nintendo tried to do with the Wii. They wanted to create a new market and make a machine that was geared towards more casual gamers. So not your hardcore shooters, not your hardcore AAA titles. They wanted to make something that could be enjoyed by the family. Whereas traditionally, gaming was a very specific subset of people before it was more widely accepted. So Nintendo was just like, no, there's so many more untapped potential. If they could just break into the minds of older generations and people that weren't traditional gamers, like your moms, like your grandmas, like people where you're like, oh, well, those people would never just game traditionally. That's a home run, because there are so many more of those people than just the standard subset of the gaming demographic, right? The 18 to whatever it was back then, mostly male, geared towards this hyper masculine style of shooter game, I guess, back then. That's kind of how I look at it. And the 4 principles are, real quickly, I'll just go over that. How to create uncontested market space by restructuring market boundaries, focusing on the big picture, reaching beyond existing demand and supply in new market spaces, and getting the strategic sequence right. So really, the 4 principles were about gearing your entire organization towards the pursuit of new markets with your differentiation low-cost strategy, right? So Nintendo was basically saying, hey, our new console, the Wii, is going to be for everybody. We're not just going to try and cater to the traditional gaming audience where most of the money, most of the dollars had been coming from in the past. They wanted something that was different than that, and they didn't want to have to be in a market where they were competing with Xbox and PlayStation. And this seemed like the obvious solution, right? So the third part of this describes 2 key implementation principles of Blue Ocean strategy, including tipping point leadership and fair process. These implementation principles are essential for leaders to overcome the 4 key organizational hurdles that can prevent even the best strategies from being executed. I'm just kind of reading I didn't feel like typing all this out. I understand the key concepts, but I didn't feel like typing all this, if you can't tell. So 4 key hurdles comprise the cognitive, resource, motivational, and political hurdles that prevent people involved in strategy execution from understanding the need to break from status quo, which that's probably the biggest challenge, right? Is challenging the mindset of, hey, this is the way we've always done things. So this is what works. This is where the traditional gaming audience is. So this is what we have to cater to. And to get people to break the status quo is a challenge. I've worked in businesses myself where it's difficult for people, to challenge the status quo. People are comfortable with what they know works, right? Changing things, you don't know if that's going to work, but what you've all done for X number of years has worked. Maybe for Nintendo, it was a little bit easier because they looked at the GameCube and said, hey, this isn't working. Breaking that mindset of the status quo as hey, this is the way we've always done things is probably the biggest challenge. So you're probably thinking to yourself, just based on that brief, I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of business stuff, even though it really excites me. If you're thinking to yourself, hey, that sounds like Nintendo to a T, right? Nintendo has always tried to compete on differentiation, saying, hey, our product is for more people. We have the most unique games. There are no Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong games on any other console. That's their value proposition. They also have always tried to compete on price as well, right? They've always wanted to be the better priced console. Consoles nowadays are, I believe I paid $500 for my PS5, whereas the Wii the Switch is $299. I think the Switch is $299, and that's something that Nintendo has always tried to focus on. After the GameCube, Sony and Microsoft kind of established themselves as the traditional gaming demographic leaders. So Nintendo was just like, yo, we're getting out of here. Like, we want to do something else. We're going to do, they were just like, we're just not going to compete with you, which is insane to think about because competition is the lifeblood of business, right? It is the lifeblood of the holy capitalistic society in which we all live. So for Nintendo just to be like, nah, we're not going to compete. We're going to go try and figure out our own thing. Is kind of insane. And that was Nintendo's push to basically reorganize their company to focus on making gaming more widely available and use their wide stable of IPs to push innovation and welcoming gaming experiences so that you didn't have to feel overwhelmed picking up a controller if you'd never played games before. And this was the concept behind the Wiimote. A lot of the games on the Wii, especially Wii Sports, which is a perfect game to represent Nintendo's new strategy. You can literally just pick it up, point at the TV, select something, and you waggle that thing around, and it works, right? You do a bowling motion, and it bowls, you swing it, it's a baseball bat, tennis. Perfect game to represent that ideology, really. So this strategy, too, can be seen in how Nintendo marketed the Wii to audiences, right? I'd be willing to bet if you grew up during that area, watched any TV, Nintendo had those "we would like to play" ads all over television. There was literally not a channel that you could turn on and not see those ads. And they were very successful. And they also had the Experience a New Way to Play campaign as well. And these ads were filled with images of people that aren't your typical gamers playing games. They were filled with parents and grandparents getting in on the gaming action, showing people playing sports together, people driving the steering wheels in Mario Kart together. And they spent, I believe, $200 million on that advertising campaign. And it really paid off. It got their message across. People were buying Wiis that had never purchased games or consoles before. It was a staple in the household. It was more accessible to parents that wanted to play with their kids. It was something simple they could just pick up and do with them. That's not something you could say for how gaming was going in the mid-2000s with, your Halos, Halo 3, Gears of War, your Call of Duties. That wasn't just something you could pick up and do. I remember my dad tried to pick up a Call of Duty game in the mid-2000s, having relatively little experience in things that are second nature to me, like reload buttons and dual analog stick control and trigger control and all that stuff. He couldn't do. He couldn't wrap his mind around how to make all this stuff work at the same time. The Wiimote was way more accessible. You just waggle it, and that's it. That's all you do. You just waggle it. And as I said before, you reinforce this idea by including a copy of Wii Sports with every Wii, right? That's a genius move, right? You're maybe not making as much software on Wii Sports as you'd like to by selling it as an individual game, but it pretty much represents the quintessential design and business philosophies behind what you're trying to do with the Nintendo Wii. Not to get all philosophical about Wii Sports, because it's literally a game where evil Miis are playing sports with each other, and Miis are terrifying and hilarious at the same time. But that's a stroke of brilliance. And just look at the 80% adoption rate for Wii Sports. I mean, 80% of people that had a Wii had Wii Sports. And it was the quintessential game it was really the pitch for the Wii, right? It's like, hey, this is literally what it is summed up in one game. And Mario Kart was the same thing. You have to think about Mario Kart, which has been an established franchise, and literally every Mario Kart game that's come out, with the exception of maybe like Super Circuit, even though I'll argue that Super Circuit was a pretty good game on the GBA, has been like critically acclaimed, lauded success. Every Mario Kart game has been a staple of that Nintendo generation. It absolutely has. Even going through to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Switch, which just still tops the best-selling games of the month chart sometimes, and that game's been out for how freaking long? It's unbelievable. But when you package an IP like Mario Kart and characters as recognizable as that, with a new, more casual way to play in the steering wheel apparatus and the motion controls, you get a unique experience that can be shared by the entire family. And that really was genius at the time. It really, coming from just a business marketing standpoint, it was genius. Up until recently, the Wii was Nintendo's best-selling console. It was recently surpassed by the Switch. And you might think that all this... I mean, I owned a Wii too, and you might think I'm just heaping praise on the Wii, and I think it rightly deserves it because it was very successful. It was arguably, if you subscribe to the console war theory of business, it arguably won that generation. I would say that Xbox really hit their stride during that generation, but the Wii was undeniably, just a juggernaut. It was such a great seller. But there were obvious criticisms with this, right? So obviously the hardcore gamers are going to go, well, that's not for us, right? There's no, and there was a real problem getting like hardcore third-party games on the Wii because it wasn't as powerful and it didn't support the online functionality, which was really big and just came into its own in that generation. That generation, despite being defined by the Wii, was also defined by online gameplay. That was the advent of Xbox Live. Not the advent, but that's really when Xbox Live came into its own in my eyes. And really, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare kicked off this just huge explosion of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare unleashed the potential of online gaming. You can't take that away from it, despite the fact that it's a Call of Duty title. I know Activision Blizzard bad, but you can't take that away. And really, Halo 3 was fully realized from that generation too. But the hardware was weaker. It did cater to a less casual audience. So if you're putting a AAA game on there and it's available on Xbox or PlayStation, it's a more hardcore game, you're not going to play it on the Wii. And less people developed for the Wii, but more people developed trash shovelware for the Wii because it was less power and there were so many available. And it was, the downside of this is the casual gaming audience doesn't know like when they're being played, when they're being duped. So they can very easily be tricked into buying garbage because it looks fun, or they don't know what to look for. That people that have the experience know what to look for, and these things kind of dogged the Wii throughout its lifetime. So much so that when it came time for a console successor in the Wii U, Nintendo kind of tried to pivot back and say, okay, we put out something a little more powerful and we want to bring back the more traditional gaming demographic. And they put out a weird gamepad, and the result was this weird thing that came out that nobody really knew like who was for, what were they trying to do. It still has Wiimotes, but it has this giant, this pad. Like, what is this? What are they trying to do here? And while I'll argue that the Wii U was important and was an important half step on the way to the Switch, the messaging around the Wii U wasn't as successful and it wasn't as the same as the Wii. That was why it was designed the way it was to try and bring back that more hardcore audience, and it didn't work. They thought it would be cool to have like the gamepad to do like an aiming thing. It just didn't translate. It didn't translate. And while I'll argue that the Wii U wasn't a bad console, it just didn't translate into sales. One thing I did want to touch on very briefly too is, and I know this is kind of a truncated episode because I'm trying to finish before my wife gets home. One of the things that Nintendo always does too, which is part of this strategy that they employed with the Wii, is their competitive price point, right? When the Wii came out, it was $249.99. Solid 250. It's a great price point. I believe the 360 was $399, and I believe the PS3 was $499. I would have to check that though. I know that both of those consoles were on the higher end because the higher hardware, right? I'm not sure about PlayStation, but it's been very well documented, especially in the recent Epic versus Apple court case, that Microsoft doesn't really make money on hardware sales for Xbox. If anything, they lose money. They take losses to get hardware into people's homes, and then they plan to make that up with software and subscription sales like Xbox Live and their games that come out. I'm not sure about PlayStation. I would be willing to bet, with as crooked as a businessman that Jim Ryan is, he's not selling the PlayStation 5 and PlayStation consoles at a loss, but I'd be willing to bet that the profit margins aren't as good as what Nintendo's profit margins are. So, I believe I had it written down here so for every Wii sold, Nintendo made $49. $50 on every Wii sold. That's insane. I believe, I didn't write down Microsoft or Sony's numbers, but I believe that they were maybe when they did sell for profit, it was like $10 to $12, which isn't great. It's not a very high percentage of profit margin, but like I said, they were just trying to get consoles in people's homes to sell software, which worked great for Sony because their AAA software took off. Also, too, many Wii games in the US were $50. They weren't full price. So this was due to less time in development and less development costs because they weren't developing the higher end games that Sony and Microsoft were. So on average, their development costs were about $5 million less, I believe the number was. But they were down. Time in development and money spent on development were down for most of their games that they produce themselves. So when you have that, that's incredible savings, and you're able to pass those savings along to consumers. One of the other incredible things about the Wii is that there were games released on the Wii up until 2020, 7 years later. I believe the last iteration of Just Dance that was put on the Wii was in 2019 or 2020. Ubisoft kept making Just Dance for the Wii because there are 100 million Wii consoles in people's living rooms, and casual gamers aren't going to upgrade, right? They're going to keep the Wii and do what they know and they love to do. They've mastered the Wii. They want to stick with that. So of course Ubisoft's going to make Just Dance for the Wii and up until 2020, because there are still, potentially plenty of Wiis in people's living rooms with the number of Wiis that were sold, right? So that was just kind of a short, rambling spiel on the Wii. I think the Wii is a very important piece of hardware. And like I said, I'm strapped for time this week, and I apologize. This episode's a little bit shorter. I talked faster, and I think the Wii certainly deserves a longer episode. Maybe we'll revisit this one day and do a longer breakdown of the Nintendo Wii. But I think the impacts of the Wii can be felt even today. And I think if you look at Nintendo's business decisions through the light of the Wii, it kind of sheds a little more light on what they're doing as a company. They kind of went away from what they were doing with the Wii U, but they're obviously still approaching this blue ocean strategy today with the Switch, with their differentiation with a hybrid console, the low cost being the less powerful hardware and the crappy Joy-Cons. But they've been able to capture this demographic of the gaming audience where, hey, you can play high quality games, but you can also take it on the go. And that never used to be the case. You can never take Super Mario Galaxy with you on the DS. They had to make separate Mario games. But now any game that's on the Switch, you can take with you. That is an incredible value proposition. That is an incredible amount of reach that the Switch has. It's going to be the go-to console for any parent with a child that wants to get into video games, right? Because they can take it with them. I mean, you look around now and see how many kids have tablets they bring with them to stores, to restaurants. It's a no-brainer. Kids bring their Switches to restaurants all the time. I've seen kids in stores with Switches playing them while the parents are shopping. I mean, that's the go-to console, and that's the more casual gaming audience and the gateway to the bigger gaming industry that Nintendo is trying to capture. And they did it with the Wii. They're doing it with the Switch now. I'd be willing to bet that the Switch is not done selling units. I don't know if it'll ever reach the lofty heights of the PlayStation 2 because that console was an absolute juggernaut. But we'll have to see. Nintendo is doing all the things that made the Wii successful again with the Switch, and it shows. They're not always the best business practices. They've got some shit they have to figure out and clean up. Obviously, Nintendo is not a perfect company. They have some labor things they have to clean up. But when you look at it from a business standpoint and you do a case study on Nintendo as a success for this blue ocean strategy, it's fascinating to see how they pivoted from the traditional demographic of gamers and basically reorganized their entire company to open up an entirely new demographic for the gaming industry. And I don't think if the Wii was not as successful as it would have been, I think that demographic might still potentially lay partially untapped. And I think the Wii plays a big part of bringing gaming more into the mainstream as it's very widely accepted now in 2022, the year of our Lord. So put some respect on the Wii's name is all I'm trying to say, right? But guys, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Again, quicker episode. Life is kind of squeezing me for time right now, but as always, I appreciate you listening very much. Links for all of the different social medias are in the description. So are the Hyper Potion links. And, I don't have a Discord, but I'm in various other Discords with a lot of our other podcaster friends. I'm also on Twitter, on Instagram. Send me a message. Interact with me there. There's some awesome stuff coming up. I'm going to be in a couple awesome episodes next coming weeks here. And we're going to kick summer into full drive. We're going to be going with a bunch of different guests coming on and the Kingdom Hearts Guiding Keys series. I'm very excited to bring that content to you guys. And as always, as I always say at the end of every episode, the most important thing is that you take care of yourselves.